All right, I got it all figured out finally. I am welcoming everyone to this chat about what's going on in the current school climate in Utah. Why I'm hosting it from a page that I set up this morning called SafeSpace Utah, which is part of a program that Savannah, Skylar, and I created a year ago in preparation for Coming Out Day, which is a way to support all students in Utah schools, specifically queer, BIPOC, trans students. So that is that's where we're streaming from today. And I would like everyone to get started introducing themselves with their names and pronouns, and then we will go from there. My name is Geraldine Hasselpool, despite what it says on the screen. It's a nickname I use. My pronouns are she, her, and I hope to be mostly quiet during this to be a learner. All right, go ahead. Ronnie Jo, Dr. Draper.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Jo Draper. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a professor of teacher education at Brigham Young University, where I teach multicultural education for pre-service teachers. And I'm also a Indigenous woman, a registered member of the Yurok tribe. So I agree.
Christine?
I'll go next. I'm Christine Hubbard. My pronouns are she, her. I am a therapist at Flourish, and I also am the co-founder of Queer Community Allies, which serves all of the high school queer students in Utah County and eventually beyond. So,
Kathy?
Hello, I'm Kathy Miner. I'm a teacher in Utah. This is my 11th year teaching. And I'm a GSA advisor. So I'm just bringing my perspective, actually working in the classroom.
Love it. Cody?
My name is Cody, pronouns he, him. I'm an elementary principal. I'm also the co-founder of Friends, Allies, and Mentors FAMs of the LGBTQ community. I also did my doctorate around professional learning for teachers, and kind of FAM's big goal and focus is about changing capacity within school systems and providing professional learning for practitioners around affirming our LGBTQ community, which we know that learning hasn't really been provided in our pre-service. Well, some people here are helping to change that, but it's not that common. And then on the job training. So FAM's trying to hopefully change that so educators feel better prepared.
Fantastic. Nika, I know that you're next, but I also know that you had some talking points that you wanted to start off with. So why don't we go to you now?
Thank you. I'm Nika Allgood. I am a parent of a transgender child. My son Grayson socially transitioned 10 years ago when he was a junior in high school. And we had the opportunity to see a Utah school do it right. I wanted to start out by giving us a little bit of the political background. I wanted to make sure that people are aware of Utah used to have a law on the books that mandated that teachers were not allowed to advocate for homosexuality. And that is the nickname of that law is the No Promo Homo law. And in 2016, Equality Utah and the National Center for Lesbian Rights actually sued the state of Utah to remove that language. And the plaintiffs in that case were 3 students in Utah schools who had experienced bullying and harassment based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. That lawsuit never was completed because the state legislature passed a bill repealing that provision of law. That bill was passed in 2017. It was SB 196. I want to point out that that bill was sponsored by Stuart Adams, who was then the Senate majority whip and is now the president of the Senate. And it passed overwhelmingly, even in our very conservative state. State legislators were willing to act on this when they saw that that language was a problem and was harming students. So after that bill 196 was passed and Governor Herbert signed it, the Utah State Board of Education wrote new guidelines to clarify that teachers were in fact allowed to talk about homosexuality. The problem with the no promo homo law in part was that it was so vague. What even does advocating for homosexuality mean? You know, it's not like a teacher's going to get up in a classroom and say, I think being gay is a great idea, and more children in the classroom would choose to be gay. That's not how it happens, right? And so because that language was so vague, it had a real chilling effect on teachers, that they didn't know what they were allowed to say and what they weren't. And so many teachers dealt with that by saying nothing. The repeal of no promo homo was a great victory. The challenge for us now is that at the time, the language was all about being able to talk about homosexuality. And some of our modern issues in the schools are more about gender identity and the policies covering protecting children as they explore and express their gender identity are not similarly clarified. Right. So the other legal issue I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that in 2016, our state legislature also passed a law making the races for the Utah State Board of Education partisan, where previously they had been nonpartisan races. And that law also got challenged in court. And so it wasn't until the 2020 elections that was the first time we had an election to this Utah State Board of Education that was partisan. And that first partisan election is what gave us at least some of our current makeup of the State Board of Education, and is leading to some of that conflict. And I hope we have a chance to talk about today that really the citizens of Utah would be better served by going back to nonpartisan elections for the state school board. If that is the case, voters, instead of focusing on whether someone has an R or a D behind their name, focus on someone's qualifications to serve on the board.
Muted myself. Just for people watching, because I know we have some people watching on Facebook, we are taking any questions live as they come up for you. So let me know if there's something you'd like me to ask the panel, and I will absolutely ask. So going on, does anyone have anything they want to add to what Mika just said?
I would like to add that another sort of thing that's facing our state legislature and our state school board is a discussion around critical race theory. And that discussion is really less about critical race theory, because it's clear that the people who are talking about it aren't really quite sure what that means. And it's not a concept or a provision that's actually part of any Utah curriculum. However, the attack on CRT has really been sort of a proxy and a way of saying maybe what we really don't want is any kind of education in the school that really promotes equity education, promotes inclusion and diversity in a way that allows students to understand and embrace and thrive within their own identities, and in a way that students can learn about the other cultures, other peoples, other backgrounds, other histories that have made up the history of the United States, the state of Utah, all those sorts of things. And so within that discussion has been, I think that we need to talk about how LGBTQ students have been harmed and will be harmed with continual discussion around banning CRT in Utah schools. And, that is something that the state school board has taken up recently. And it is there's a pretty good chance that that'll be part of the state legislative session in the upcoming session. You got to unmute yourself.
I know. It's fine. Just so we're going to have a legislative session to ban something that's already not even in use in Utah public schools. Oh, okay. Seems like a good use of taxpayer dollars.
It's a good conversation.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone else have something they'd like to add to what Nika said?
This is like kind of like so I was a classroom teacher at the time of the kind of no promo homo legislation, and yes, the legislation, but also with the removal of it. And I think something really important that I think, as Dr. Draper is also talking about here, is, and what I'm already starting to see in schools, is that even though individuals, some of them know that like critical race theory is like a theoretical framework that scholars use generally in higher ed institutions to kind of frame their research, many people who are discussing this don't really know what that means. But what's concerning is the fact that individuals are taking critical race theory, taking the no promo homo policy, which was actually coded under human sexuality instruction. That's another thing that individuals didn't really discuss. Like, human sexuality instruction isn't referring to someone's sexual orientation, but it was talking more or less about what occurs during sex education. But that overarching chilling effect of the no promo homo policy, at least the last form as it was written before it was removed, was never really clarified to practitioners, and no one really took the onus at a higher level to clarify what that meant, because I believe the intended people who put those policies in place they hoped that it did what it did, right? And that it silenced a lot of voices. And that's what the policies and the conversations around critical race theory, and this is just the start of many to come. And that's why it's important we're watching things such as this critical race conversation, because it's not just racial, so to say, minorities, although we are becoming a global majority, world. So white people are eventually will not be much longer in the United States a majority. And I think that's scary for people. And it's scary for individuals and practitioners who aren't queer to see that only their stories are really centered in our educational spaces. And people are worried about pride flags and these symbols. And so kind of on my roundabout tangent is that people's kind of discomfort and these ambiguous policies have worked so well to silence people and to erase identities from our spaces. And until kind of these brave souls, think about the onus we had to put on youth in order to challenge this policy, right? Like, imagine what it's like to be front and center, and the language and the threats and all those things that come about based on that happening, right? Like, there was so much we never realized probably what those individuals experienced to make this happen. So it's super important that we don't allow us to get to a space again where these really toxic and harmful policies get into place, because the onus generally ends up being on the youth then to challenge it in the future. And that's what I don't want to see. So am I a queer educator, and does this personally impact me? Yes. But I also work with, in a setting in elementary with 7 years plus span, and I see the impact and the positivity of inclusive symbols and curricula has on students. I see the fear that educators have as far as not really knowing what to say, or if someone complains about them having inclusive texts and things that represent queer individuals. And I also see the impact that vague no promo homo policy in Utah had on me as a practitioner, on me as a queer educator, and on even our educators who want to be allies in this work, how fearful they are about their job and their safety. So there's so much happening right now. And Dr. Draper brings up this valuable point that critical race theory, this conversation is step one to many to come. And it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that we don't kind of idly sit by and just assume that others are going to send that email or call the representatives. We all have to take that onus. Children in the system are not, to make sure that we're actively making sure that we're sending the affirming messages to our politicians, to our schools, to make sure that we're inquiring about the inclusive things they're doing and asking them that, instead of people just only reaching out and saying, do you have a pride flag? Are you including these things? As like a negative thing. But those teachers, they really need to hear from you about your support and love to back this. And that will help us fuel that motivation and support to keep going forward.
Yeah, so what we're hearing in schools, or hearing about what's happening in schools, is that a teacher may have a pride flag or some sort of rainbow something happening, and also declaring their classroom a safe space, and then either the site administrator, the principal, or someone within the superintendency or whatever, then asks them to remove those symbols from the classroom and claims that advertising their classroom as a safe space suggests that other places around the campus aren't safe, which for a lot of students, they understand that actually is the case, that there maybe are places on campus where their identities, their bodies are not safe. And the reason why these symbols have been asked to be taken down, they're using the excuse that they're political. We have to understand that teachers in the schools do not have complete freedom of the First Amendment and freedom of expression. They are required or restricted to having things in their classroom, having things on their walls that support the school curriculum. And so one of the challenges that is faced is that LGBTQ issues are not written into our curriculum as something that we ought to teach. And this is not the same from state to state. Other states like California, Nevada, other states in the country have particular curricular concepts around LGBTQ issues, whether it is thinking about that in literature, whether it's thinking about that in history classes, whatever it is. And so that is another challenge that faces teachers, is that if they can't really point the curriculum, then they have to say, well, then I have to take down rainbows, which I think is such, we're also seeing this around any kind of Black Lives Matter, any kind of support for other kinds of racialized students. And so I think this is something that is quite alarming. The other thing that teachers have been asked not to do is not to ask students what their pronouns are. And that that simply by asking students their pronouns, that somehow they are putting in the minds of students confusion around gender and creating a situation where especially cisgender students become confused. And then there is the issue around parental rights, where a lot of folks are interpreting the parental rights laws in the state of Utah, saying that parents have a right to demand that their child be called by a particular name and have certain pronouns used for that child, and that teachers don't then have a right to use the name and pronouns that a student desires in the classroom. However, we also have laws, I mean, this is where things get real tricky. We have laws where if a child comes out to a teacher, the teacher does not have the freedom to out that child to anybody else, not to another teacher, not to a school counselor, not to the child's parents. And so teachers can really find themselves in a bind where they're using a child's name that they've expressed they want to have used for them in school, and they're using the child's pronouns. But those aren't the names, the pronouns maybe the parent is using, and the teacher isn't in a position to say, hey, your kid uses this name and these pronouns in my class, because that would be outing the child. And so then there are folks, there have been parents who've been very upset with that and suggesting that that violates their parental rights when that is the case. So this is super gnarly in terms of legal issues, and Cody is 1,000,000,000% right that the way this is going to change is really by children bringing lawsuits that will maybe affect change. And that is a tremendous burden to place on young people who should be focused on things like, what's up with algebra? Why do electrons work this way? Just the things of real, importance to youth, and that they should be really working on kind of just figuring out their own lives and not having to take up a battle to change the entire school system so that their existence as a full human can be honored.
I do have one thing to add to this, and that is that I worked for several years as a counselor at the Trevor Project. And when we have people calling in who are suicidal, and we ask, first of all, we ask if they have any family that is supportive, and then we ask if there are any teachers that they know or faculty at school that are supportive. And they'll say, I don't know, how would I find the ones that are supportive? I would say, well, you're going to look for things like rainbows in their classrooms. You're going to ask, these are the things you want to look for. And it breaks my heart to think that that is a question now that in Utah, students are going to say, there's none of that. And to not feel like they have anyone at their school they can trust. That's one of the most heartbreaking things about these things, to me anyway, as someone who worked in that suicide prevention space for so long.
Do you think that teachers still have a right to some self-expression? As a teacher in a public school, I wouldn't be allowed to, let's say, like wear a Trump for President shirt. All my Trump for President shirts would be just sitting in the closet unworn. But teachers do have a right to have some to express themselves. And so, and this is a question that isn't quite hammered out, so on a teacher's lanyard, can they have a rainbow? Can they, on their lanyard, can they do something, when they're wearing, their own personal clothing, jewelry? And, I've even had queer teachers who have maybe a a rainbow tattoo, or they're wearing a rainbow wedding ring because they're married to, you know, an awesome person of the same gender, or maybe they've got a photo of them and their spouse on their desk, wondering if that is going to be a problem. And so, you know, when we look at these little markers that teachers can do to sort of suggest that they're safe and someone who students can go to reduce their student harm, you know, there's still questions about whether those like personal things are going to be part of what is banned for teachers.
Can I add on to this discussion too? Because a lot of this discussion, understandably, is about what teachers are comfortable with and what teachers feel like they have a right to do, which I think is, you know, clearly who students are spending most of their time with. But in this discussion where, you know, it's been brought up like, the laws are so vague and they're worded in a certain way, even if it's not super specific about what educators can talk about or can't talk about in what context, that chilling effect, it doesn't just impact teachers, it understandably impacts counselors and administrators and everyone who's in charge of the teachers. So hopefully without spending too much time, I'll just say, because I teach psychology, I'm an AP psychology teacher. And my first year teaching AP psychology, obviously it's a college level psychology class, and it doesn't spend a ton of time on it, but it talks about sexuality and it touches briefly on homosexuality, and we cover that in the course and stuff. And it came back, I was talking to some coworkers about it, and I mentioned how, you know, like, oh, it was kind of tricky my first year, I was in my early 20s and stuff. And they're like, oh, you talked about that in class? And I was like, well, yeah, it's in the textbook, it's covered. And, you know, all the other teachers in the district were like, you cannot talk about that. Like, you know, no promo homo. And I'm like, well, I'm not promoting homosexuality, you know, the same discussions we've had. And they were all really quick to say, you can't even talk about it. You can't even talk about it. Right. So for years after that, it was basically like, well, okay, we're just going to skip this section in the textbook. Good luck. It's on the AP test. I can't talk about it. Right. So again, just, you know, where we hear information. And then another quick story, just to kind of paint the scene of where is information coming from, right? One of the first years there was a GS, and I don't want to like point, you know, I'm a working teacher and I love my school. I'm happy with my job and stuff. This person they're not at my school anymore, but an administrator that I really liked as a person. They were a good human. I think they probably would have viewed themselves as an ally, whatever that means in Utah, you know, probably conservative leaning, but, you know, wanting to get along with students. An administrator came into my room and they're like, hey, we need to talk about GSA. And I said, okay, what's going on? And they said, well, we've had a complaint from another teacher about one of your GSA kids. And I said, okay, what's going on? And the administrator said, well, the teacher's concerned that the student is talking about the Gay Straight Alliance in their class. And I said, okay, what's the problem? And they said, well, you know, the teacher just is concerned. They're like inviting students to come to the GSA club meetings. And I said, okay, what's the problem? And, you know, essentially this teacher had approached the administrator, and they were concerned that, you know, this kid was like recruiting kids to GSA. And anyway, I'm kind of like, you know what I mean? It's like, I had to pause and talk to this administrator and say, this is a club. It's a school approved club. Students are allowed to invite other students to come to a school approved club. And it was a moment, and that was super awkward for me. I'm a young teacher. I think you know, just out of my provisional stage. I think that administrator was someone who was like observing me that year and like giving me my, you know, like giving me observation feedback and stuff. And I basically had to tell them like, this teacher is homophobic, and the fact that you're talking to me about this and wanting me to tell my student to not talk, does that make sense? And so there's so many levels of fear, and I want to assume that everyone in education wants what's best for the students, right? The counselors, the administrators, the teachers, but everyone's afraid of the parents at the end of the day, or afraid of the backlash and not knowing how to navigate that political scene. And sorry, like I think I kind of went on a tangent there, right? But again, I think the vagueness is the point. with the legislation, right? Just like when GSA clubs started becoming a thing, guess what? Rules about clubs in schools got a whole lot stricter. And now non-curricular clubs have to recharter every year. And there's rules about if you don't have a signed parent permission slip, you're not supposed to attend club meetings, and you're not allowed to have guest speakers, and you're not allowed to go on field trips. And if you show a video, you need admin approval. And well, you know what I mean? Like all these things got a lot stricter, but we're not discriminating against the GSA club. It's just that everything got stricter for everyone. And that's the same thing with, you can't use nicknames, right? No student, like teachers can't use nicknames for any student, right? Regardless of gender identity. But you're saying, are other teachers going to get in trouble if we're calling a cis student by a nickname that's not approved? We haven't sat down and called a parent. And anyway, okay, so I'll like tap out for now, but I'm just saying, like, all of this, it's really phrased in a very careful way of like, hey, we want what's best for everyone. We just want to protect the parents, but I think we all know it's not going to be carried out equitably or thought of equitably in the minds of teachers, admin, counselors, and everyone involved. And that's what's concerning to me. It's deceptive. So.
Kathy, as a follow-up question to that, we have a question in the live feed. How can I, as a parent, help with GSAs not being seen as a political group? Identity does not equal politics. How do we answer that question?
I don't know. I don't know what the best answer is. I'm sure other more educated people could help with that. Just, I think in Utah, unfortunately, the parents with the loudest voices are, politically united and organized. And typically in Utah, for whatever reason, they're politically organized on the far right. And so that's who administrators are hearing from. And for whatever reason, I mean, yeah, there is a specific political demographic in our state, and it is not perfectly balanced, but it's not as unbalanced as people tend to think. And I think a lot of people who, support the queer community and support, like want to be advocates, I think we kind of, myself included, honestly, I grew up in Utah, and I think we kind of have this mentality of like, I will personally be an ally and I will do the best I can, but I kind of have to like be careful and not stick my neck out too far. I have to protect my job. And it's this very complicated, calculated thing that everyone has this idea of, I have to protect my job, right? But I'm really willing to be loud when it doesn't involve my personal paycheck and my personal safety. So if you're a parent, I would say, email the administrator, make your voice known in support, because that's really what they are catering to, as no one wants to admit it, right? But education is all about keeping parents happy. So that's my 2 cents, but sorry, someone else.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Can I jump in real quick to add to that? And I will say, I'm not a teacher, I'm a therapist. So I have a very, very different perspective of what goes on in schools, because while I'm not physically in the schools every day, I'm working with the kids who are. And my client base is almost exclusively queer. And these kids, they come to therapy and they can tell when people are afraid to help them. They pick up on that. And if you look at it from a purely brain scientific, psychological perspective, these kids are living in fight or flight responses all day long at school, which when that happens, their ability to learn shuts down. And they are trauma reacting to everything around them. And so they come to therapy and they say, well, I think my teacher might be supportive. Like I saw them wear like this rainbow pin, but like I couldn't really tell. And I don't want to say anything just in case. And I don't know if I say anything, will they call my parents? Because my parents definitely don't support me. So I can't say anything at home, so I can't say anything at school because they might call my parents, or they might tell my counselor, who then will call my parents. And so these kids are living in a constant state of fear. And I mean, the Board of Education, their mission statement is to create safe, equitable learning environments for kids. And without that safety piece, there's no learning, period. And so we talk a lot about these parent rights. And I have a background in child welfare, so I know a lot about parent rights and all of that that's concerned with all those issues. But I think a lot of times when we start talking about parent rights, we forget about the rights of our kids and their right to safety and their right to learn. And if they don't feel safe, they're not going to learn. And that's the purpose of education, pretty much, period.
Christine makes such a good point. And the data really backs that up. In 2018, there was a research paper published in the Journal of Adolescent Health that studied transgender kids and whether their chosen name was respected and whether their pronouns were respected. And it showed that trans kids who got to use their preferred name and pronouns were less likely to take their own lives, that they were happier at school. In fact, the professor who was the lead author of that study said that he said, "I've been doing research on LGBTQ plus youth for almost 20 years now, and even I was surprised how clear that link is." And so teachers who start off the year by sending out a piece of paper asking what kid name the student wants to go by and what pronouns, they're sending a very strong message to the students in their class that I will respect you, you're safe here. And then they can relax, not be in that fight or flight mode, and learn. And as a parent, I saw that so much with my own son because Grayson's high school was supportive. When I went in with Grayson to talk to the counselor, they updated Grayson's name, his preferred name, in the records right away while I was there. And that was on a Friday. And the next Monday when Grayson went to class, his teachers called him Grayson and used male pronouns. And it just made things so much simpler for my son. He could be at school to be a student and be a good student. He was the first national merit finalist scholar that New Ames ever had. And he could do that in part because he could go focus on being a student instead of having to worry every day about what was going to happen at school that day.
I do have another question. As someone who is studying education, I am worried about what is going to happen to me as a queer teacher. Is it as scary to be a queer teacher as it seems to be? Cody, maybe you have some words for that.
I was like scanning the screen. I was like, oh, I wonder. Yeah. Yes and no. So when I was looking for a teaching job, I'm an elementary educator, which adds a whole extra layer as far as one, identifying as male, and some of the interesting things I heard about what grades I could and couldn't teach because I was a man. And then also being queer in 2010, 2011 was about when I started my teaching career. And so we had these no promo homo policies in effect. So I think the more I guess through FAM and meeting other queer educators, what I've come to realize is we've made a lot of improvements as a state, which should be celebrated. But I can't say that the journey will be perfect. So in kind of scanning for safety, just like our students do in school spaces, I was looking at non-discrimination statements that districts had. And at the time in 2010, 2011, the only two districts that specifically enumerated sexual orientation, in which I was looking for myself as far as at least job security, was Salt Lake City School District and Park City, I believe. And since then, things have expanded, but I made the choice by living in the Valley that, Salt Lake District was the only district I was going to apply for. It's the only district I was willing to student teach in. And if I did not get a job in Salt Lake, then I wouldn't be going into education. And I just happened to have an undergrad degree in business and was like, maybe I'm just going to go back and look into that field, because I knew that my own authenticity as like a practitioner would be kind of invaluable for my students in the long run, because we ask so much from them to be authentic or want them to be. And still today, like I'm a building principal now, right? Like I carry a lot of positional power in that role, but I'm still navigating individuals who are upset about a pride flag, and wanting to pull things. So like I'm currently dealing with those things as we speak. So even in what would be deemed a more progressive district, there will still be times where you feel challenged. But what I would say is go with your gut, get the vibe, and really do your research about what district you're going to be teaching in, and maybe the administrators, because teachers will let you know, and if your own safety and security will allow you to be the best teacher possible, there are schools that we have that people would gladly hire and look for practitioners who are not only great role models for queer students, or the importance we know how, like in Utah, can you imagine if you're a Black student with a Black teacher, right? Like that representation is so important, and that's what I look for as a principal. So there are people out there, even non-queer admin, who would gladly support you as a queer practitioner. But not every space is there yet. That's why these policies and those things are going to be super important as well. And that there is a huge network of us out there to support each other as well in Utah, to kind of lean on and get through those troubling times and swoop in and help when needed. So, it's exciting to hear about more queer educators. And I think if you're passionate about it, I think there's going to be a space for you.
There is another question, unless someone has something they wanted to add to that. This question comes from a school psychologist. Thoughts about how to handle parent-teacher conferences, typically attended by both the parent and the student these days, in situations where a transgender student either isn't out to the parents or the parents are unsupportive. We've got a couple of these looming on the horizon. I usually prep or suggest prepping with the student ahead of time to ask how they would like it to be handled, but would love to hear thoughts from the experts.
Ask the kid. Put the kid in the center. Ask the kid. The kid knows the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent.
I would also say, it's always safe to defer to they, them, right? That seems pretty safe. If you didn't have a chance to check in or anything, that's a good default, I would say. That's what I would do.
Yeah, you can use language like, tell us about your kid. You can as a teacher, but I think this goes back to what Cody was talking about too. I think the teachers, school staff often aren't prepared to have conversations about trans, non-binary students. They're not really, they haven't maybe put into habit different ways of talking about the student in a way that doesn't center their gender. And so as educators, it's on us to really learn those things so that we, you know, when a parent comes in, let's say that the parent is not aware that their child is socially transitioning at school and using male pronouns and using a name that's not on their birth certificate. A teacher doesn't have to go into the meeting and misgender the kid, right? The teacher can still go into the meeting. Maybe the parents are using a particular name, but the teacher can do things in a really appropriate way to be able to say, yeah, your kid did this, and this is what I'm, you know, wondering about. And then, you know, be able to be in that conversation in a way that both shows that you're interested and you care about the concerns that the parents are bringing, and that you are protecting the young person at the same time. I think that good teachers, good school counselors know how to do that dance, but they may need more professional development in order to really understand how to do that. And that professional development is often not available to teachers. And it's not even a difficult professional development. And for most teachers that I know, they yearn to know this because they want to do right by students and they want to be respectful to parents. This is not about like down with parents, up with students. We know that supporting families and supporting them in the way that they can develop in really rich and whole ways is really important. And teachers want to do that, but they have to know the language around how to do that.
But I think this brings us back to why we're meeting here today, because what's happening at the State Board of Education really is a step back, right? I mean, this document, it's phrased so nice, like we want inclusion, we don't want discrimination or prejudice, and we know that, you know, like all this harm comes to, you know, to queer students when they're not treated with dignity and respect. But the problem is that there wasn't previously anything on record about teachers and staff being able to use these preferred names. And so now that this is going to be, I mean, in theory, the suggestion from the state board that's going to get passed down to the districts, and that's going to be a huge hurdle for every district, for every teacher. Now what we're going to see is whether, like, even as a GSA advisor, I'm also a teacher who is a rule follower, right? And especially maybe as a GSA advisor in Utah County, you know what I mean? Like, I never want to break rules or step out of bounds or do anything to, you know, not to make it about me, right? But like, I feel like there's so many teachers that are like, yes, like we care about students and counselors and admin, and we're going to do these nice things. So like, I don't know, taking it back to the document, I don't think very many people understand how much of a step back this is by rewording, because it was just kind of vague and like, yeah, like teachers who are, you know, just doing their best, like a student approaches them, can you use this name? Yeah, sure, cool, whatever. They might have their own religious beliefs, they might personally disagree, but as an educator who wants to support the student and see them thrive, they might still be willing to do that. But now if there's a rule, they won't be willing to do that anymore. And so I'm very concerned as a rule following teacher, and knowing who I work with in the building as good, well-intentioned people who will not be willing to break rules or stick their neck out for this. And so I think it's going to take it's going to take an effort to make it not a rule. So
yeah, watching the most recent board meeting, the Board of Education meeting, when they were creating this document, and listening to them talk about just how to title it, And I mean, I think they spent 45 minutes coming up with just the title for this one document, and listening to them use the term trans-identifying and going back from using gender identity to trans-identifying. And thankfully there was someone that called them out on it and said, this is not how the community wants to be talked about. That term, trans-identifying, is a transphobic term. And just realizing by listening to that how little understanding there is at the state level of what these issues are and how to even talk about it. And they're the ones making the rules to trickle down to the teachers. And that's a big part of where parents come in, is reaching out to their school board member and telling stories, and not even parents, but students or people who used to be students or whoever, reaching out and talking to their representatives, to the board members from their area, and trying to help educate them, not just on what's going on in school, but how to talk about it. Because obviously that's not happening. And unless they know how to talk about it, and unless they're looking at research and they're talking to people who do know how to talk about it and who do talk to these kids and understand the impact, not just from an educational level, but from a mental health level, the rules that they come up with are going to be a step backwards, like Kathy said. And they're going to tie the hands of students more, and they're going to create more problems than they're fixing.
I think that business owners and other folks who have an invested interest in a good, solid public education for the citizens of, the state, the county that they're in, whatever, also play an important role. I think that, businesses who want to be able to recruit a diverse pool of employees are, they have to be able to say to people they're recruiting, you know what, we got great schools here. You're going to have, these are good schools for your family. But if I'm a queer employee, if I'm a non-white employee, then I have to, when I look at these kind of policies, then I say, this is maybe not the school I can send my kid to. And maybe that means this is not the place where I can come and work and enjoy employment, because of understanding that my children would not be welcomed and not be supported, not be well educated, not be nurtured in this school environment. I think that when businesses also put some pressure on their representatives, their school board members, and say, hey, we want to recruit these kind of professionals, but we need the schools to be places that we can tell our employees that their children are going to be safe. I think that could also put a kind of pressure on people who are passing these kinds of policies to rethink what they're doing. I mean, we've got to talk to our state legislators, our school board members in words that they understand. And sometimes that's dollar bills. And so that people who see themselves as allies and people who also understand that they rely on public education, the employers in this area rely on public education for an informed, able employment base, they should be insisting that the schools are better. And so there's lots of ways that people who maybe aren't parents right now with school age children can put pressure on elected officials.
Dr. Draper, there is a question specifically for you. And you can say whether or not you want to answer it, but it is, would you feel comfortable describing how BYU is enabling or restricting you?
I can say some words. The thing about my position and what I do at BYU is BYU, like other universities in the area, is accredited to prepare teachers. In order to do that, in order for teachers to have licenses, and in order for me to do what is ethically and morally right, I need to prepare teachers, like what Kathy was saying, for all of the public, regardless of what teachers' considerations are. So our teachers are expected to be able to qualify for a Utah State license to teach, and the expectations are really that they have, certain competencies around how to help all students thrive in a classroom. And so I am met with students who are becoming teachers who say, well, I don't know, I don't really agree with that, or that doesn't fit with how I understand the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then I have to say, yeah, that may be the case. And you're going to be in a public school setting, and you have to do certain things because your students aren't going to be maybe members of your faith community, and you still have to be supportive. And so I tell my students that they need to sort of get on board with really being supportive and nurturing of students. And if they can't, then maybe they need to consider another profession where that isn't going to put them in some sort of personal conflict with the way that they understand their religion. And for the most part, BYU understands that we're a professional school, or preparing professionals, and that is part and parcel to what I do. When I started doing a lot more research and focusing on queer studies and queer pedagogy, one of my supervisors said, why are you doing this? Why are you going this direction? And I said, if our students are going to a school that is supported by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we cannot prepare teachers to be loving and accepting of every child that comes into their classroom, every family that comes into their classroom, we need to get out of the business completely of preparing teachers, because we should be the best at that. We shouldn't be lagging behind other professional schools in knowing how to educate teachers to go out and serve absolutely every child, every family in a way that is nurturing and uplifting. And my supervisor said, you've got an excellent point. I said, I'm full of excellent points. So that's how that's mostly gone down for me.
Another statement that was made, there's lots of statements on the live stream, but I'm only reading the questions. But one of the statements that has piqued my interest is from Kathy Carlston. Says, I'd love to see professional development offered by a central resource hub. What would that look like? I mean, obviously that should probably come from, technically it shouldn't have come from the Board of Education, right? Which we got beef with right now. But what does that look like? What would that central hub for teacher development be that would help to mitigate some of these issues? Anyone have any input on that?
I have lots of input on that. So because I'm a social worker, and because I also have a nonprofit that works with schools and with teachers and helping to educate not just those spaces, but trying to bring it all out into the community. This is something we've talked about a lot and something I've thought about a lot. And I think that schools need to use their social workers a little bit more in this area. social workers aren't, even the ones employed by districts, are bound by a different set of ethics that are a little bit more specific and encourage advocacy. I mean, that's part of what we do. That is what we do a lot of the time. And so allowing the social workers that are already there to create these professional development programs for teachers could be done from the state school board level. They're starting a new program and position that is specifically social workers in education. All districts, all schools, most, not all schools, but all districts have school psychologists and school social workers, and all of those people can put together not just what is involved in the curriculum, because they have to know that as well, but what is involved in how to talk to kids about these issues, how to talk to parents about these issues, how to navigate conflict about all of this, and how to watch for any potential dangers or warning signs, and who to contact and who to get in touch with, while also giving teachers and educators, administration, a very basic level of what gender identity is, or sexual orientation is, or what language to use and what language not to use, and things like that. And schools are just starting to use their social workers more, and I think this is a place where that really could be a huge benefit to everyone involved.
I think something that I've seen, not only just recently graduating, so being I'm really immersed in the recent kind of scholarship around LGBTQ inclusion in schools. I'm happy to see that like the narrative around LGBTQ inclusion is shifting from not only kind of a trauma or kind of a deficit lens, in that LGBTQ students are only victims, they are only set with obstacles and barriers, but more of an additive like approach to highlight really the contributions. Do I think that for many of us leveraging, so to go back to this kind of question about professional learning, I think if I, in my dream world, could make any change, it would be that in part of the teacher preparation programs, there was at least a bare minimum we could expect, like me as an administrator, when I would be hiring a new teacher, that they would have basic competencies around knowing the LGBTQ community, terminology, pronouns, things like those, like the basic data. And then on the job, ongoing expectations for districts and schools to create trainings that really support and affirm LGBTQ identities that dig deeper than just bathrooms, right? Like bathrooms are super important, like that's about safety and well-being, but that we're actually digging deep into like the curricular inclusion and all the awesome stories of queer people throughout history that have really changed things and the future for the whole world, right? And so if you just get a one-shot professional learning for 90 minutes, oftentimes you're going to maybe get a cultural competency training, learning the terminology, the basic things, but you're not really digging deep into how do I leverage core standards to embed LGBTQ identities, because that's the piece where practitioners, when they say, this is relevant to my course or my class, and it fits this, this, and this, and other individuals who have done other pieces of equity work in all the different intersectionalities have really found the greatest success in unfortunately having to leverage it in those standards and other things. So they say like, this is part of the course, or this is part of third graders, this is part of 8th grade math. and this is why. And they've thoughtfully prepared that response when anyone questions them. And so I think it's an ongoing and a really iterative process for professional learning. And we know, and what the research supports with professional learning, is that transformative work really is ongoing with coaching and support. And this is no different, right? For any of the equity pieces. So I would like a basic commitment from preparation programs. And then we need a lot more commitment because things are always changing. My training 15 years ago is not relevant pretty much at all today. And that is how the queer community works. That's how other equity pieces are. The world is changing, data is changing, things are that. But I want to really start moving the needle to just all of the beautiful things that queer people do, and start really painting queer people in positive lights, so that that teachers don't only have to feel obligated to do this because it's only decreasing suicide rates. Yes, it does that, but there's so much more to it as well.
I agree completely. We cannot be satisfied with students just sort of white knuckling it through school and just like, oh, they're barely surviving. That's not thrivance, and we should be going for thrivance. So for like a curricular example, it's fairly typical in an English language arts classroom at the high school level for a teacher to maybe share, talk about Langston Hughes as part of, how we, maybe think about poetry or whatever. And it would be really appropriate. No one would give a teacher kind of two glances to sort of talk about how his race and growing up as a Black man, how that influences poetry. The next step would be, let's talk about his sexual orientation. Let's talk about the fact that he was a gay man. How might that have affected his poetry and the words that he wrote? And that would just be sort of a regular, normal kind of discussion to have in that classroom. That kind of discussion helps queer students understand that their life experiences, their perspectives on the world, their ways of being in the world are can be cherished, can be useful in art making and in civic participation. It also helps kids who are straight and cisgender also understand that LGBTQ folks have such beautiful things to offer the world, and that can be part of just a beautiful conversation that really fits with how we understand the need for students in English language arts settings to be able to read and understand texts from diverse authors, from understanding things from diverse perspectives. I mean, that goes right with the curriculum, but a teacher needs to be prepared to understand and be able to stand out boldly and say, yeah, this is what I'm doing. I've told people that, I'm a former high school mathematics teacher. If I was told to take down rainbows, I would just be there would be so many posters of RuPaul doing algebra in my classroom. Like there would be some way that I would signal that. Maybe I'm more of a rebel rouser than maybe a lot of my colleagues, but I would find a way. Like my word problems would be, Hank and Joey are planning their wedding reception, and they've got to double this recipe, like whatever. Like I would find a way to do that, but that does require professional development to talk about how do we make those curricular connections so that students can be seen and students can see others.
And I think this kind of goes back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning about critical race theory. Is critical race theory isn't what a lot of people think it is, where it's trying to make everyone feel bad about what has happened in history, but it's looking at these things that we're already learning about from a multidimensional lens. It's not just, okay, let's read this poem and say, what did you get out of it? Let's talk about how this person is Indigenous or African American or European or gay or trans, or how all of these facets inform everything that everyone does, even down to, I mean, I have no clue about math. I'm a social worker. There's a reason why I went into social work. But I know that there are some mathematicians that maybe where they were in the world at the time and the things that they were experienced helped them develop certain theories. And it's the same in English and history and psychology and science and all of these things. And unless our teachers are learning how to talk about all the different facets of what they're teaching their kids, they're not giving our kids a full perspective of the world that they live in and how the world that they live in was created.
I think I already said this, and again, I know we're talking about the well-being of our students, particularly our LGBTQ students, but as the teacher voice here, and I know Cody would probably back me up, like, and I know that like different teachers have different personalities, and it's so weird because like in a way, I'm a very outspoken person in my personal life, right? And I'm like like I said, like I'm a huge ally and advocate in a way, right? But as we're having these discussions, I think we have to keep coming back to the fact that for teachers, it's not just about job security. There's so many ways that teachers' lives can and are made miserable when they step out of line or are not, you know what I mean? And so there's a very real reality, and you know, there's so many factors, like who are the administrators in charge, and how much value do you have in the building? Are you a coach? Are you what subject do you teach? Like there's so many things that it's not just about the teacher's willingness to be an ally, but this is why there has to be support from an institutional level, because yes, there are like brave, strong teachers who are willing to like stick it to the man, right? But that can't be the action plan, right? It has to be about rallying the community to, anyway, that's my 2 cents. Because
no, I agree with you completely, Kathy. I think that when we have and this is really on purpose. I mean, this is how settler colonialism, white supremacy, the patriarchy, whatever you want to call the system, how the system works. We can go after kids by going after teachers. When we don't protect teachers, we're not protecting kids. And so I think for sure, I don't think a teacher ever needs to apologize for saying, well, I need to be protected too. And, I think that is absolutely the truth, because when we protect teachers and we have better professional development for teachers, we have policies that protect teachers, we ultimately protect children. And those two things cannot be talked about separately. For sure. And I think that your point about, there are lots of ways that teachers can be made miserable. And the idea that, that I can have the privilege of saying, yeah, I'll put it on the line that's a risk, kind of study that has to be done. And absolutely not all teachers can do that. And the system knows that. And this is how the system works to maintain oppression. I'm just getting right into all the hard words, but that's really what.
Well, and I think it's because it's triggering like my guilty conscience, you know what I mean? And I'm sitting here as a GSA advisor and I totally support the community, but I'm looking back at all these years of what have I done and what have I not done, because I can't upset this person and I have to protect, so again, not to make it about me, and I am someone who knows that I am an ally, and I'm willing to stick my neck out, but to some degree. And so when you think about the common denominator of how much is any given teacher willing to do or not do? So that's why, anyway, so that's what it's so complicated.
When we saw what happened in Murray School District last year with reading a book to a class and how internationally that started to get talked about. And so, I mean, that triggered this whole onslaught for that poor school and their administration and their teachers to deal with the backlash from the parents for one book. And not even by a parent whose child was in the class where the book was read. So like, our teachers are, I mean, they're living in a constant state of fear in almost the same way our kids are. And they're not going to be able to teach as well as they could in that environment. And if, I mean, we've talked about this before, we look at history of policies being made and like, oh, okay, well, we can't have safe spaces because that means there's unsafe spaces. So we're just not, no one can do it. Or no one can use nicknames because we can't talk about gender identity. So we're just not going to talk about different names at all.
We'll have no clubs in our school. No
Yeah.
clubs in our school.
No clubs.
In case a queer kid gets to have a club that affirms their existence. Yeah.
Yeah.
No
And
clubs.
We're going to get to the point, and this is extreme, I know, like with like the sports argument and the bathroom argument, and maybe we're just not going to have sports. I mean, I know that will never happen because that's a huge moneymaker for schools, but like it's in, I always use this example, and I know I'm not a teacher and my world is a little different, but when the state of Utah was trying to prevent same-sex couples from being foster parents and being placements at all for kids in the foster care system, they made this rule that there can be no cohabitating couples taking kids in custody, which really, really cut down on family placements happening because there are a lot of family members who are cohabitating, and so they couldn't be placements for their nieces and nephews or grandkids or whatever. And that was to keep people who couldn't be married from being foster parents. That like huge across the board thing. And then same-sex marriage became legal. And within a year, and I was working in the child welfare system at the time, within a year, that cohabitation law went away. And so we look at these sweeping policy changes to block one teeny tiny area that no one wants to talk about and no one wants to have conflict about. So we're just not going to talk about anything that maybe might be related to it. And we've got to stop doing that. And I know you all know this, but like, as parents, as community members, as anyone who possibly can, talking about it and telling people about it and asking for it. The people on the front lines, LGBTQ teachers, ally teachers, people of color, all of those things, we help the issues be pushed into people's minds. And a lot of times it's the people behind the scenes that are the allies that are getting the things to happen because they're the people that people are listening to. And so we need our allies, we need our parents, we need our community members, our business owners, our higher education, all of those things to start talking, because a lot of us either can't or no one listens to us. And so anyway, that was a tangent, but
We're going to have to close pretty quickly because this has gone on for longer than I think most people are patient for. So maybe some final thoughts, but also I put it out on the live stream. Is there interest in continuing this conversation, maybe bi-weekly or even weekly? I mean, I know that everyone's schedules are different. Maybe it doesn't fit for everyone, but there's certainly other people we can pull in so we can continue to have this conversation. How does that sound to the five of you?
My thinking and just knowing holding spaces like through FAM every 3 to 4 weeks, seems like a good cruising kind of time for people so that they feel that with all the things going on in life, they can still balance that. And I am definitely new in my role this year and a single admin. So I may not be able to make it to everything, but I would love to continue the conversation. And my final thought would be that I get, from my perspective as a building admin, the only messages that I ever hear are questioning as to why the inclusion is occurring, but not as to why it isn't. So if you're a parent, what I would say is don't take chances, ask them what they're doing. If you're a donor and a foundation to a district, I would ask specifically the ways in which they support kind of historically minoritized populations or underrepresented groups. And if they can't give you sufficient answers, then maybe look to give your money elsewhere. Those things are going to send really loud and powerful messages. And right now, a lot of the anti-LGBTQ or anti-critical race theory, or just inclusion as we know it, they tend to have been rallying better and sending out it. So if we could get our big groups like Mama Dragons and others to really be showing up in those spaces and sending the messages, that's what we really need at a time like now. So thanks for having me.
Cody, would you be willing, or anyone, would you be willing to help maybe write some sort of message that people can pass on in their own words, but sort of hitting all the points? Because people are going to be like, yeah, I'll write, but what do I write? What are you doing about inclusion? Maybe it would be helpful to have some talking points for parents to use to speak to districts and donors. Is that something you'd be willing to work on?
Yeah, happy to help.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say? Kathy?
I'll just say quickly too, because I know that, like, even for me personally, like as someone who cares about this, I think sometimes it seems a really overwhelming task to be like, oh, email this person on the State Board of Education or whatever. But honestly, like, brevity is fine. Like the main issue here is not everything we talked about today. Like, we don't need to tackle all the LGBTQ issues and all of critical race. Like, I mean, this is wonderful. Like, that's a beautiful, wonderful goal. But if you could just write an email and say, hey, even if you're not super liberal or super like a total huge advocate or whatever, you could just listen and say, I'm a teacher or I'm a parent, and honestly, I'm pretty moderate or I'm conservative, but I support teachers being able to use nicknames with students. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think I'd rather have students feeling safe and valued in the classroom, and just leave it at that. Like, we clearly live in a world that's so polarized politically. Let's try to make this less political, right? I support teachers being able to call students the name they want to be called, because it'll help the students learn in the classroom. Like, that can be the short, sweet email. If we can like come up with a hashtag or some sort of campaign to just flood the Board of Education with just that short, sweet message, like, that can be the top priority for now, in my mind.
And I will jump in at this point and applaud Kathy for saying, let's make things less political, and then invite everyone to make it a little more political by please writing to your state senator and representative and tell them we really need Utah State Board of Education races to go back to being nonpartisan. We would have more competent, well, we would have one less incompetent member of our state school board if that were the case.
All right, if there are no other comments, I am going to just thank everyone for being here. And I will send out information about when we will do this again. Maybe it sounds like 3 to 4 weeks is the sweet spot according to Cody, and that fits well with me. I'll start collecting more questions, and I will be in touch with everyone here and on Facebook, letting them know when they can tune in for the next, I don't want to say episode, but that is exactly what it is. So yes, the next episode of our support of teachers and students. All right. So thanks for joining. Thanks. And feel free to look at the comments on the live feed, and because lots of people were so grateful for all your input. And I want to thank all of you for taking your time and your patience being here to talk about these issues. So thank you. All right.
Thank you for creating this space.
Yeah, always. All right. See you
Bye.
later.